The Intergalactic Academy was a marvel of diversity, a place where beings from countless species came to study and grow. The atmosphere was one of intellectual exchange, diplomacy, and peaceful coexistence. But gym class? That was something different altogether. Gym class wasn't about strength or endurance. It was a controlled environment, designed for safety. The activities were gentle, meant to accommodate the many fragile species that attended the academy. Students with bones as brittle as glass, or limbs too sensitive to exert much force, all shared the same space. The purpose wasn't competition, it was about cooperation and maintaining physical health in a minimal way. For many, just moving in different gravities was enough of a challenge. John's arrival changed the mood instantly. A human from Earth, one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, known as a death world. Stories about Deathworlders were whispered in the academy halls. The conditions of their home planet were extreme: violent weather, carnivorous wildlife, toxic ecosystems, and humans had survived and thrived there. It made them a species to be feared. The moment John walked into class, everyone stared. He wasn't overly large by human standards, but compared to most of the aliens, he was a giant. Muscles rippled under his academy-issued uniform, and his quiet demeanor only made him more intimidating. His reputation preceded him, and the alien students had no idea what to expect from him. Was he dangerous? Was he uncontrollable? No one knew, but they had all heard the stories. John, for his part, remained calm and respectful, trying to fit in. He had been briefed on the other species' frailties and was determined not to cause trouble. But he couldn't help noticing the way everyone looked at him, like he was some kind of wild animal that might attack at any moment. He said nothing, just stood quietly by the wall, waiting for instructions. The gym instructor, a slender alien with soft, gray skin and a calming presence, began the class as usual. The exercises were simple: low-gravity calisthenics to warm up, followed by a short endurance drill designed to accommodate even the weakest species. The aliens moved with precision, carefully performing their stretches and gentle movements, aware of their own physical limits. John joined in, doing his best to mirror their movements. But no matter how much he tried to tone himself down, his natural strength made everything seem effortless. When he bent down to stretch, his muscles flexed in ways that the aliens had never seen before. Whispers started to spread across the gym. "They say Deathworlders can lift 10 times their weight," one student muttered. "I heard they can survive in zero gravity for days without food," another added. John tried to ignore the growing tension, but it was hard not to notice the way the other students stared at him, wide-eyed and cautious. The warm-up drills continued, and John found himself holding back even more. Every time he moved, he was aware of how much stronger he was compared to the others. It was like he was in a room full of delicate glass figures, and one wrong move could shatter everything. Next came the endurance drills. The aliens moved at a steady, careful pace, their thin limbs shaking with effort. For John, it was hardly a challenge. He had grown up on Earth, where gravity was stronger, and the weather could change in an instant. His body had adapted to the harsh conditions of his home planet, making these drills feel like a light jog in comparison. But even as he tried to keep his pace slow and controlled, the other students couldn't help but stare. To them, it seemed as if he wasn't even trying. Every bead of sweat that rolled down their faces contrasted sharply with John's composed demeanor. They pushed themselves, struggling to keep up with the routine, while John appeared completely unaffected. The final part of the class was a team game, a simple one involving light weights. The students were divided into groups, tasked with lifting the weights together and moving them across the gym. It required coordination more than strength, and it was a game meant to promote teamwork among the different species. John was placed in a group with 3 other students. They eyed him nervously, unsure of how to handle having a human on their team. The weight they were assigned was no more than a challenge for the average student, but when John grabbed hold of it, the others could feel the shift. He was barely using any effort, yet the weight moved as if it weighed nothing at all. "Careful!" one of the aliens hissed, their voice filled with panic. "You're going to drop it!" John instantly relaxed his grip, trying to let the others take more of the load. But even then, his strength was impossible to ignore. The whispers started again, growing louder as more students watched the human effortlessly outclass them. For John, it was a frustrating experience. He didn't want to stand out like this. He didn't want to scare anyone. But no matter how much he held back, his every movement seemed to magnify the difference between him and the others. The gym class, which had been calm and cooperative, was now filled with tension. The alien students kept their distance, whispering among themselves as they stole glances at the human. The gym class buzzed with excitement as the students gathered for the next challenge. The instructor explained that it would be a team-based weightlifting competition, where each group would need to lift a series of weights across the room. For most of the students, this was considered one of the toughest tests of the semester. The weights, while not overly heavy in standard gravity, were designed for low-gravity species, and lifting them required precision and teamwork. The aliens, with their various physiologies, took the task seriously, cheering each other on and coordinating their efforts. John, as usual, stood off to the side, observing. He wasn't entirely sure how to approach this. Earth's gravity had conditioned him to think of weights differently. What they found difficult here might not even register to him. His mind raced, trying to find a way to participate without overshadowing the others. But the instructor noticed his hesitation and called him over with a smile, encouraging him to give it a try. "Come on, John. Don't worry. It's just for fun," the instructor said, trying to ease any awkwardness. The teams were formed, and John found himself with 3 other aliens, 2 from a low-gravity planet with thin, wiry limbs, and another with a stockier build but short stature. They all exchanged glances, unsure of how to handle their human teammate. But they proceeded with the task, lifting the first weight with coordinated effort. The aliens struggled, their faces contorting with exertion, but John barely felt the resistance. He followed their lead, trying not to use too much force. Still, he could sense the weightlessness of it all compared to what he was used to on Earth. It wasn't until the second round that the trouble started. The instructor had upped the ante, increasing the weight. One group had already dropped out, unable to lift it at all. John's team looked at the new challenge with apprehension, but they were determined to keep going. John stepped up and placed his hands on the bar. The aliens around him braced themselves, taking positions to lift. When the instructor signaled, John lifted, effortlessly. The weight rose so quickly that his teammates stumbled, caught off guard by how easily John had moved it. The other students stopped in their tracks, jaws dropping as they watched the humans single-handedly hoist the weight that had been considered almost impossible. There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by a whispered, "How is that possible?" from one of the students nearby. The shock rippled through the gym. Some of the aliens recoiled instinctively, their natural caution about Deathworlders flaring up. To them, what John had just done was not only unnatural but borderline dangerous. They had always heard stories of humans, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. One of the students muttered, "That would crush anyone from my planet." "How did he?" Another one added, "I heard humans can survive things that would kill most species instantly. This is terrifying." John could feel the shift in the room. The casual, friendly atmosphere of the gym class had disappeared. Now, it felt like everyone was staring at him as if he were some kind of dangerous creature. His strength, which he had tried so hard to hide, was now out in the open. It wasn't just his physical power, it was the implication that he didn't belong here, among these fragile beings. The murmurs spread quickly. Word of John's feat began to filter out of the gym, circulating through the academy halls. By the time the gym class resumed, it was clear that John had become the center of attention, whether he liked it or not. Some of the students looked at him with fear in their eyes, while others seemed to regard him with a sort of reverence, as if his strength made him something more than human, something untouchable. The instructor, noticing the rising tension, tried to restore normalcy. "All right, everyone, let's not make too much of this. It's just a different gravity for him, that's all. Let's focus on finishing the exercise." But the damage had already been done. The weightlifting competition carried on, but the students' whispers never stopped. John's presence had changed everything. His strength had shifted the balance in the room, and no amount of calming words from the instructor could undo that. After class, the instructor approached John, pulling him aside quietly. "I know you didn't mean to, but you've made the other students uncomfortable," they said gently. "They're not used to someone like you. You're stronger than they'll ever be, and that's intimidating for them." John sighed, nodding in understanding. He hadn't wanted this to happen, but what could he do? He couldn't change who he was, and he couldn't pretend to be weaker than he was. Still, he didn't want to alienate his classmates any further. "I'll be more careful," John said, though he wasn't sure how much more he could hold back without simply sitting out of every activity. The instructor smiled, appreciating his willingness to adapt. "I know it's hard, but we'll find a way to make it work. Just try to tone it down a bit for their sake." John agreed, though inside, he felt conflicted. He understood why the other students were afraid of him, but it didn't make it any easier to deal with the fact that he was different. No matter how much he tried to fit in, he was still a human, a Deathworlder, and that was something that couldn't be hidden for long. The high-gravity drill was next on the gym instructor's list, a notoriously difficult exercise designed to simulate conditions on planets with heavier atmospheres. For the alien students, this was one of the most challenging parts of their training. Some of them had naturally low body density, and the idea of enduring even a few minutes in a high-gravity zone was daunting. The instructor reminded everyone that the point was not to complete the drill quickly but to push their limits and get accustomed to functioning under extreme conditions. John stepped into the simulation zone with a calm expression. He had trained in various environments before, and Earth's gravity was already considered higher than most of the planets these students came from. As the drill began, the artificial gravity kicked in, and the alien students immediately felt its weight. Each step was laborious, every movement requiring immense effort as they fought to maintain their balance and pace. But John? He barely noticed the shift. While the others struggled to lift their limbs, John moved with surprising ease, his body adapted to these conditions from years of experience on his home planet. He advanced through the course quickly, reaching checkpoints that the others hadn't even approached. His classmates, once again, found themselves staring in disbelief. One of the larger alien students fell to his knees, panting from the strain. Others were trailing far behind, clearly worn down by the pressure. But John's resilience stood out. He wasn't even sweating. The whispers started again, though quieter this time, filled with awe and more than a little fear. This was no fluke. Deathworlders were truly as powerful as the stories suggested. As the drill came to an end, the instructor praised the class for their effort, though the focus remained on John's exceptional performance. Several students exchanged nervous glances, wondering if there was anything that could truly challenge a human. Some even murmured that John's endurance was unnatural, a sign of how dangerous humans could be in combat situations. Next, the class was split into teams for a competitive game, a mix of agility and strength, where they had to capture flags in the high-gravity zone. The instructor, eager to foster teamwork, explained that the goal was cooperation and speed. John, trying to shake off the awkwardness from earlier, decided to give it his all, hoping that participating would bridge the gap between him and his alien peers. The game began, and John made a conscious effort to hold back, wanting to match the pace of his team. But as the intensity of the competition grew, he found himself slipping into the familiar competitive mindset. In a moment of excitement, as his team approached the final stretch, John dashed forward to grab the flag. He didn't notice one of his smaller alien teammates trying to get to the same spot. John collided with the alien, a small, delicate creature from a low-gravity world, with a force that far exceeded what the student could withstand. The impact was immediate. The alien student crumpled to the ground with a sharp yelp, clutching their arm in pain. The entire gym froze. John's heart sank as he realized what had happened. He knelt beside the injured student, panic flooding his thoughts. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice shaking. The student wasn't gravely hurt, but the injury was enough to send a shockwave of fear through the rest of the class. The alien's fragile frame had simply been no match for John's overwhelming strength, even though he hadn't meant to use it. The instructor rushed over, calling for medical assistance. John backed away, unsure of what to do. The rest of the class watched in horrified silence, eyes wide with fear. The whispers turned darker now, less about admiration and more about concern. This wasn't just about strength or endurance anymore. This was about control, and the clear danger John posed to those around him. "Take them to the medical bay," the instructor ordered, as a medical team arrived to tend to the injured student. They were escorted out quickly, though not without casting one last glance at John, a look that seemed to confirm everyone's worst suspicions. The tension in the room thickened. The students no longer whispered in awe, instead, their murmurs were tinged with distrust and fear. What had been growing admiration for John's abilities was now overshadowed by his potential for harm, accidental or not. John stood awkwardly in the middle of the gym, his teammates avoiding eye contact. He had never felt so out of place, so isolated. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but his very nature, his human strength, seemed to put him at odds with everyone else. It was becoming painfully clear that no matter how hard he tried, fitting in might be impossible. The class resumed, but John's participation was minimal. His usual enthusiasm had drained away, replaced by guilt and frustration. The other students kept their distance, their previous admiration overshadowed by the reality of how dangerous a Deathworlder could be. The isolation sank deeper, and for the first time, John wondered if there was truly a place for him in this academy. John, filled with guilt after the accident, sought out the injured student as soon as they returned from the medical bay. His mind raced with regret, but he knew an apology was the first step. Standing before the alien, he took a deep breath, then spoke with sincerity. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," John began, his voice softer than usual. He explained that Earth, being a death world, forced its inhabitants to develop resilience and strength just to survive. His muscles, built to withstand harsh environments, didn't mesh well with the more delicate physiology of his classmates. "I'm still adjusting," he admitted, "but I never want to cause harm." The injured student, still wary, listened carefully. They had heard about Earth's dangerous reputation but hadn't fully understood the implications until now. Slowly, the realization dawned that it wasn't malice that drove John's actions. It was simply a result of the vast differences between their species. "I understand," the alien said cautiously. "You're just different. We all are." Though there was still some apprehension, the student appreciated John's honesty. The gap between them, though still present, had begun to narrow. The gym instructor, having witnessed the exchange, gathered the class around. He saw an opportunity for a teachable moment. "We're all from different worlds," he said, his voice calm but firm. "John's strength may seem overwhelming, but it's no different than any of your own unique abilities. Some of you can breathe in toxic atmospheres, others have mental capabilities we can't even comprehend. This is what makes interspecies cooperation so valuable." The class listened intently, some nodding in agreement. The instructor continued, "It's easy to see someone like John and focus on the potential for harm, but we must remember that strength is a tool. When used wisely, it can uplift others. And that's what we're here to learn, not just how to survive as individuals, but how to thrive together." He turned to John, giving him a nod. "John, like all of you, is capable of empathy, restraint, and teamwork. Let's not forget that." The atmosphere shifted. The tension from earlier had begun to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. John, once seen as a potential threat, was starting to be viewed as someone who could contribute to the group's success, if given the chance. For the final part of the class, the instructor introduced a new challenge. This one would require every student to work together, combining their unique abilities to complete a difficult obstacle course. It was designed to test not just physical strength, but communication and cooperation. John, determined to make amends and prove that he could fit in, approached the task with renewed focus. As the challenge began, John made sure to stay aware of his teammates. Instead of rushing ahead or relying solely on his strength, he paid attention to how each alien moved and adjusted his own actions accordingly. When a particularly heavy object needed lifting, John stepped in, but this time, he slowed down, ensuring that the other students could keep up and contribute. His immense power became an asset rather than a source of fear, and his classmates started to rely on him in ways they hadn't before. One alien, whose species was known for their strategic thinking, took the lead in coordinating the group. They gave instructions, and John followed them closely, learning how to harness his abilities in a way that benefited everyone. The challenge pushed each student to their limits, but with John's strength carefully balanced by the others' talents, they navigated the course with surprising efficiency. As they reached the final stage of the obstacle course, it was clear that the teamwork had paid off. The class finished the challenge together, with each member playing a critical role. The alien students, who had once feared John's capabilities, now saw him as an indispensable part of the team. There was still a sense of awe toward his strength, but it was tempered with respect and understanding. After the exercise, the students gathered, breathing heavily from the exertion, but with a newfound sense of camaraderie. One of the aliens, who had been particularly vocal in their fear of John earlier, approached him with a hesitant smile. "You're strong, but not just in the way we thought," they admitted. "Thanks for helping us." John, relieved and grateful, nodded. "Thanks for trusting me." The gym instructor, watching from the sidelines, felt a sense of pride. This was exactly the kind of growth he hoped to foster in his students: understanding, cooperation, and the ability to embrace differences. John had come to the academy as an outsider, but now, he was starting to find his place. As the class wrapped up, the alien students began to accept that John's strength, while extraordinary, wasn't something to be feared. It was just another tool, one that, when wielded with care and understanding, could strengthen the group as a whole. And in that moment, John realized that being different wasn't a weakness, it was a strength in itself, one that could help bridge the gap between species, if given the chance.